Hello, everyone. I'm Julieta Mendez, Director of Programs at Candid, and I'm joined today by Ariana Schindel of Risa Collective here in Brooklyn. She will be one of our presenters for our upcoming live online training on March 26th, Skills for Overcoming Burnout, Refueling the Fire. Thank you so much for joining us today. This will be the 7th webinar in our series, All Together Now, Conversations in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I wanted to get the conversation started by asking you a couple of questions. The first one is, why is it critical for the social sector to discuss the impacts of stress and burnout? Ariana.
Hi, thanks so much, Julieta. We really think about in this field, right, we're in it because we have a passion for justice. We have a passion for change. And we have a fuel that pushes us forward. And we need the fire that will continue to fuel us and not burn us, or worse, burn us out. And we really take this seriously at Risa. And even if the burnout doesn't always seem urgent, right? It's the cumulative stress. It's the little things that add up. So sometimes people sit in their jobs and feel that their work isn't actually creating change, or they don't have time for the things that matter most in their lives, or their voice in their organization isn't valued, or they're exhausted, always reacting to emergencies in the field. Yeah. And each of those little things can add up over time into our work to create a culture and environment that really burns us out, or creates divisions and conflict in our organizations, and impacts the quality of our work. And so we want to think about really creating more sustainable activism. And I think my work in this area, I began doing advocacy strategy for a very big foundation working with grassroots groups all over the world. And I really was there to focus on how do we build effective advocacy strategies and fight the fight against the man. And instead of being able to do that, I was often called in to support organizations to deal with what lies under the surface, which is the pain we feel because sometimes our work doesn't have impact, the stress that this is bringing on our lives, the way that impacts our relationships, and worse, sometimes people would cope in our movements by drinking a lot or by leaving the movement altogether. And, you know, we've even had some recent high-profile deaths in the movement, suicides, from large organizations where people are really just saying this work cannot sustain us in this way anymore. We need to do something different for ourselves and for our movements so we can really face the challenges that lie ahead. And so we began to see that we can't really separate out the strategies that we have for creating change in the world with the changing of ourselves and the sustaining of our organizations.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. What is your experience in helping organizations implement new practices to be more resilient?
Well, Fire That Fuels is actually the name of a project we have that's really about creating a culture of sustainable activism across teams and organizations and movements. And the idea is that we have a network of activist advocates who are able to think about in their own context, how do these practices get translated? And so how do we affect change across a very small grassroots organization where we work potentially with LGBTQ groups in Uganda versus other groups that we work with around work service providers doing domestic violence work across the United States. The way that they address those and even the issues that they face have to be adapted and looked at very differently and contextualized. And we believe that organizational leaders, staff, members are the best people to create those shifts and changes in their organizations. And so part of Fire That Fuels is thinking about how do we support and give people the practices and tools so they can impact change in their own context. And, you know, one of those contexts we work in a lot is with humanitarian workers supporting refugees in Greece and in other places. And we recently launched a training of trainers there after doing an initial training. And so we have kind of advocates there who are beginning to shift these practices. And we really focus a lot on not only the individual impact, but what does stress look like across an organization? And so often it looks like different conflict and coping styles. And so we do an exercise where they're able to assess and analyze how do you deal with stress and conflict, and how does that then impact your ability to resolve it? What does that look like in the organization? And they do like a mapping across the room, and then they role play different scenarios in which they could address it. And we got word back from that organization that they were able to resolve all these crises that had happened because they could better understand why and how different people were responding in different ways to what was happening, and come up with organizational protocols that helped people feel supported around that. So that was a big recent win, and we keep seeing all those things happen in different ways with different folks we've been training with.
That's great. That's great. What's one thing that our participants will be able to do right after the webinar?
Well, I think the idea is how are you able to walk out of this webinar feeling like you have some really concrete practical tools to refuel your fire? And so we think, really stress management, we think about how do we balance the demands on our time and the pressures with the resources and our coping methods? Because we're not going to eliminate them. We're suddenly not going to work in a field that's not stressful, right? That's the work. That's what allows us to have the passion around it, is to respond to these really dire issues. And yet we have a lot of coping skills and resources. So the idea is, how do you feel like those things have been better balanced in your life? How have we given you more coping skills, access more resources, family supports, community supports, spiritual resources, things around you that will help create that balance? And so we have kind of an assessment called COPE, which is an acronym that helps you assess your organization or your team across different dimensions of resilience in terms of your communication, openness to change, and flexibility. So that's like a larger assessment tool you can use with the organization. And then we have similar tools where you think about developing out some of these strategies in your own life and figuring out who your support people will be to create some accountability around that change.
Great. We like our audience to get to know presenters as people and not just as talking heads. So I'm just going to ask you a very personal question, well, a fun question rather. What is your favorite podcast?
Oh, okay, well, I have a few because I'm like a little bit of a podcast junkie. My first is our organization actually has a podcast called Bad Feminists Making Films, which is really about how do we decolonize the film industry. Check it out.
Mm-hmm. What is it called again?
Bad Feminists Making Films.
Bad Feminists Making Films, okay.
Yeah, and so we interview some incredible folks, my colleagues, do the interviewing and really talk about the complexity of some of these issues and storytelling and voice and power. So that's a big one that I listen to. And then if you're, for folks who really are interested in thinking more about this healing and care work, there's a great podcast called Healing Justice that has actual practices each week that you can sit and listen to at your desk, and then start applying different journaling and meditations and different techniques for folks who actually work in the social justice field and are thinking about care work. And then let's see, I used to love this one called Politically Reactive, which was with Kamal Bell and Hari Kondabolu, because I think one of our coping strategies is how to make humor and light out of the most complex political situations of our time. It helps make them more manageable. So yeah, I think those would be my top ones.
Wonderful. Well, Ariana, this was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today. I'm excited to continue the conversation with you on March 26th. This will be a live online training that is free to the public, thanks to the generous support of Borealis Philanthropy. We hope that you can join us live or register to receive the recording to watch on your own time. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Ariana. We'll be in touch.
Yes, thanks so much.